Entertainment continues to be driven by story, as it always has been. But when a good story is absent, that entertainment is not consumed by an audience. They're not interested. In other words, garbage in, garbage out. And nothing is more clear when it comes to cinema or television ratings performance when you have a good story, or when you have a bad one. The issue with entertainment products over the last few years is the insistence on tossing out the story in favor of some ideologically driven narrative. And this has not only driven out the quality in the story, it's also driven out the audience and their interest in the product that's being provided. And I use the word product for a reason, because that's what movies and television are being sold as nowadays. They're certainly not entertainment anymore. I think you'll probably agree. The claims when it comes to the audience behavior when confronted with no story and just ideology is that the audience is actually the problem. Well, I think it's time that we take a look at that. In fact, it's going to be pretty easy because the Motion Picture Association of the United States, or of America, or of the world, I guess, because it's a global survey, has released their report for 2020. And it breaks down gender and ethnicity of moviegoers. At least we're going to focus domestically on what it looks like here in North America. Here we go.
Ladies and gentlemen, hiss and foes, welcome to the Culture Casino!
Throughout 2020, the United States still sought out entertainment. And of course they sought out distraction, and they looked for it in many different forms. They absolutely needed it. There was even a film industry that kept running despite the onset of a global crisis. And the bad news for Hollywood, and for the studios, of course, that make up Hollywood and the Hollywood system, at least here in the United States, is that the gross box office here was down 80%. It was already projected to be a down year, but 80% is staggering. Of course, there were some things to offset that, about a 30-some% increase in digital consumption, but that still leaves about 50% off the board, which is bad. Many films, actually, because of what was going on, were pushed back, and we all know that, but there were still several films that made their way into theaters. In fact, we're back on a theatrical release path that seems to be moving in the right direction. But of course, we need to get back to 2020. So when we look at the films that were performing in 2020, Bad Boys for Life performed the best, with 1917 coming in second, and Sonic the Hedgehog pulling into third place with pretty respectable domestic numbers, all considering. And that's with Sonic the Hedgehog actually having a very small release window. It wasn't that long at all. Unfortunately, many of the other films that were released early on in the year had much, much lower numbers. Some have even been called outright flops, or even bombs. Let's focus on the films that were released, or at least the first 5 or so, and let's look at the audience makeup for each film. And let's look at the earnings to try to show how ridiculous a narrative is around failing Hollywood products and why. Let's first talk about the audience in terms of the gender share. As you can see here, this demographic is consistent, and it has been for a very, very long time. Theatrical audience has always skewed a little bit more male than female, of course, and conversely, the television audience is overall always skewed a little bit more female than male, and these have been true for decades, so we'll just leave it there and move on. In theaters in 2020, you can see here, out of the top 5 films, the audience skews 53% male, 47% female. The Birds of Prey film still settled on the male side of the equation, just as was relayed anecdotally by people observing the audiences when they went to see the film. Doolittle skewed quite a bit female. That was also expected. It had a heartthrobby star that women seem to be attracted to. When we look at the ethnicity of the audiences, as you can see here, we also get things breaking out as expected, at least demographically. When it came to the films, or these 5 films that we're going to focus on, the demographics were borne out again, well, pretty close across what you would normally expect from moviegoers, at least for the most part. Bad Boys for Life skewed slightly black, but was the most balanced across the entire board as far as the ethnic consumption, or the ethnic makeup of the audience, however you want to phrase that. 1917 skewed heavily white, as did obviously Dolittle. Now, Sonic reproduced the results that you would expect of a video that was based, or a movie I should say, that was based on a video game. But the average came in close overall, with less white than the population age bracket and more Hispanic and black than the population age bracket that was expected. Again, this is a trend that's been continuing for the last 3, 4, 5 years, but it's also, fairly balanced, at least demographically. The most consistent moviegoers across the board, believe it or not, as far as a percentage of audience, were the Asian Pacific Islanders and the Native American Other category, which I actually found interesting. That number just kind of seems the same on all these films, or very consistent anyway. To say that the demos across the board are consistent and expected based on the film type and genre and story would probably be a very accurate statement. This is exactly what you would expect if you were marketing a film, or at least if you were doing it properly. Or there was ones different. We'll get there. Even more telling, of course, is the actual ticket sales when it comes to the movie-going public. And again, this is the demographic we should probably really focus in on. Just 49% of all tickets sold to moviegoers, of course, were white, 49% white, while 29% were Hispanic, or Latino, if you prefer, and 14% were African American, or if you prefer, black. The takeaway from all of this data is that the per capita attendance is highest in the Latino community, at least here in the United States. It's pretty impressive. In fact, they actually use the term in this report as overrepresentation, because it's so high at 29%. With all of the audience data that's collected here, let's now look at the actual performance of the films. Bad Boys for Life came in at $206 million, despite the R rating, which sometimes can drive, total revenue down for some reason. And it actually provided the most diversity of an audience, which we saw before. It had a solid story with action and comedy, because those two actors have chemistry and we always come back for more. And it was a profitable film, and it benefited from the being released early in the year before the global crisis even started to take hold. Now, Dolittle, which was released the very same time, the very same day, the very same weekend, which didn't have a whole lot of diversity in the audience, as you can see here, had a very bad story, and it performed very poorly. It actually opened, as I mentioned before, the same day as Bad Boys for Life, with roughly twice the budget, believe it or not, as you can see here, or I should say there, anyway, as you can see. And it didn't even reach here domestically what the actual budget for the film was as far as its earnings at the box office. Now, again, box office money doesn't actually translate to profit. It has to be split with the exhibitors. So there's a lot of movie math that goes into deciding if a film actually made money or not. And again, not the focus of this video, so we'll move on. To be honest with you, Bad Boys for Life did much, much better than Dolittle, because Dolittle, in fact, only made $251 million worldwide. It lost a decent chunk of money for the studio. It really did. It wasn't profitable at all. Also, I like pointing out, I should say, that the Bad Boys for Life opened in fewer theaters at 3,775 versus Dolittle, which opened with even more theaters at 4,155. So Bad Boys was just a good film with the ability to satisfy an audience. It also had something called legs, which means it was able to run longer. Now let's look at Birds of Prey. It was poorly marketed, using the stunning and brave babble that has turned so many off to so many films for the last few years. It had stars that actually actively attacked the audience, and specifically men, who, believe it or not, were still always going to be the consumer for this film. And it, of course, touted being female-centric and female-driven, which also isn't a good strategy. It's a story that was actually complete garbage, and if you listen to any of the qualified reviews, it would be very hard to argue with my assessment. It lacked the realism of even the most rudimentary superhero or comic book film, and how did the drinker put it? It featured some very accommodating stuntmen. Very accommodating indeed. The production budget, which appears to be fudged down from the leaked number that we had early on, we'll just say we'll give it to them at $82 million. It opened in even more theaters at 4,236 theaters, which is, again, even more theaters than either Bad Boys or Dolittle. And it flopped domestically, as expected, at $84 million, and globally at an overall total of $201 million. Not very good. As you can see, the movie just started to flatline about day 17. That's obvious here. I can already hear the objections from those that would actually support the performance of this film and defend it. So let's be honest. Let's get to something that probably you should take a look at. A video game adaptation film premiered a week later, a week after Birds of Prey. It also premiered in fewer theaters, and it beat the total box office of Birds of Prey by $100 million. It also was in theaters 7 days less overall. And since we've already broken down the audience, and we've already broken down the films, can we just agree that a bad story will make a bad film? Can this really be argued? The audience seems to have spoken here. But there's a lot more to this Motion Picture Association report, so if you'd like, you can get it for free. It's a PDF. You can download it. You can look over it if you would like to. There's a lot of wonderful breakdowns in here, and I always tell you, do your own research and research these things, because I can only give you what I find, the information, and I can only regurgitate what I think. Everything else should be up to you, and that should be the way you consume your news products as well. So at this point, I just want to know, what are your thoughts? What do you think? Because it seems to me it's kind of important to tell a good story. That should be the first thing. And it looks like the studios just don't get it, or at least they stopped getting it. Hopefully they get it again in the future. So do use the drop down section below there that says comments and throw me one if you're interested, and I'll try to respond in kind. I do try to get to them all. Be sure to support other independent creators here on the platform. I know I say this pretty much every time, but I actually mean it. The way things are set up now, YouTubers like me, the small guy, they don't get a lot of support from the platform directly. They have to work very hard to get on the recommended list. So you can make it slightly easier by leaving a comment, throwing up a like, or even a dislike. And of course, sharing out the videos that you find interesting, because you can do that on social media on various platforms, including Twitter, Minds, all that stuff. So I know they would appreciate it. And as I always do, I'll end the video the same way. Be sure to take care of yourself, take care of others, wash your hands, of course, because it's good hygiene. And until next time, bye.
Thanks for visiting today. Be sure you're subscribed and hit that for alerts.
Yay!
Of course, like and share all of the videos that you can, as it helps with the algorithm. Have a great day.